Gabriel Mitchell sits frozen in first class as the pilot's racist announcement about special security checks for certain passengers echoes through the cabin. His finger hovers over the record button on his phone while flight attendants nervously avoid his gaze. They don't realize he owns the airline. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button right now if you've ever witnessed discrimination in a public place. Subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who believe in accountability. Now let's see what happens when a powerful CEO experiences racism on his own airline. The crisp white collar of Gabriel Mitchell's designer shirt contrasted sharply with his deep brown skin as he settled into Seat 2A of Skyline Airways Flight 447 from Chicago to Atlanta. At 43 years old, Gabriel had mastered the art of blending in despite his 6'2" frame and the quiet confidence that typically drew attention. Today, he wore no company pin, no executive ID badge, nothing that would identify him as the founder and CEO of the very airline carrying him southward through clear April skies. "Coffee, sir? Or perhaps champagne?" asked Amara Johnson, the lead flight attendant, her practiced smile containing a glimmer of recognition. Gabriel was notorious within Skyline for his unannounced flights, his way of experiencing the airline as customers did. "Just water for now, thank you," Gabriel replied with a subtle nod acknowledging their silent agreement. Amara was one of the few employees who recognized him on these incognito journeys, but respected his preference to remain anonymous. Gabriel hadn't always owned an airline. His journey began in South Chicago, where his mother worked 3 jobs to keep their small apartment in a neighborhood where ambition was often crushed under the weight of systemic barriers. He'd earned a scholarship to Northwestern, graduated summa cum laude, and built his first logistics company from scratch. When the opportunity arose to purchase a struggling regional airline 7 years ago, Gabriel seized it, transforming Skyline Airways into a symbol of excellence and inclusion. As other passengers boarded, Gabriel opened his laptop to review notes for tomorrow's announcement, a historic merger that would make Skyline the largest Black-owned business in America. Worth $3 billion, the deal represented not just a business triumph, but a powerful statement in an industry where executives who looked like Gabriel were rarer than in-flight gourmet meals. Through his open laptop, Gabriel caught fragments of conversation from the cockpit as Captain Richard Whitman performed pre-flight checks. At 54, Whitman had logged over 20,000 flight hours during his 28-year career, the last 5 with Skyline. Another diversity training. "Next month," Whitman grumbled to his co-pilot, unaware of his proximity to the CEO. "As if we need more sensitivity workshops when we should be focusing on flight safety." The co-pilot's response was inaudible, but Whitman's dismissive laugh carried into the cabin. "Yeah, well, the new ownership has its priorities." Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly. He'd heard similar comments throughout his career, the implication that diversity and excellence were somehow mutually exclusive. He made a mental note, but remained focused on his work. Tomorrow's merger announcement was too important to be derailed by one pilot's outdated views. The flight was particularly significant because Skyline would be absorbing North Star Airlines, creating the nation's 5th largest carrier. Gabriel had worked 18 months on the deal, weathering skepticism from industry analysts who questioned whether a Black-owned airline could successfully execute such an ambitious expansion. As boarding continued, Gabriel observed the crew's interactions with passengers. Most were professional and warm, but he noticed how Whitman barely acknowledged the black and brown crew members during his brief appearance in the cabin, reserving his collegial banter for white staff. Amara returned with Gabriel's water, placing it carefully on his armrest. "Everything to your satisfaction, sir?" she asked, her emphasis on the last word barely perceptible. "Perfect, thank you," Gabriel replied, appreciating her discretion. At 35, Amara was one of Skyline's most experienced flight attendants. She'd been with the airline before Gabriel's acquisition and had embraced the culture shift he'd implemented, becoming an informal leader among the cabin crew. Gabriel reflected on previous incidents of discrimination throughout his career, being mistaken for support staff in his own boardroom, security guards following him through luxury hotels, car service drivers expressing surprise when picking him up from first-class lounges. Each incident had strengthened his resolve to create spaces where excellence and diversity weren't seen as competing values. The final passengers boarded, including Dr. Elijah Washington, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s who took the seat across the aisle from Gabriel. They exchanged polite nods as the boarding door closed. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure," announced the co-pilot, First Officer James Peterson, his voice crisp and professional. Gabriel tucked away his laptop, took a sip of water, and gazed out the window at the Chicago skyline. His mind was already in Atlanta, imagining tomorrow's press conference announcing a deal that would reshape the airline industry and strike a blow against the subtle bigotry that permeated corporate America. What he couldn't know was that the journey itself would become a turning point far more significant than the merger it preceded. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Gabriel sent a final text to Madison Taylor, Skyline's PR director. "Arriving on schedule. Final review of announcement. At 8 p.m. He didn't mention he was flying incognito on the company aircraft. That was standard practice for him, a way to ensure quality never slipped when executives weren't watching. The engines roared to life, pushing Gabriel gently back into his seat. As Flight 447 accelerated down the runway, the plane lifted smoothly into the afternoon sky, banking slightly to catch the southbound route to Atlanta. Captain Whitman's voice came over the intercom, his tone professional as he welcomed passengers aboard and announced their flight time of 1 hour and 47 minutes. Everything seemed routine, exactly as Gabriel expected from his flagship airline. He had no way of knowing that in less than an hour, this ordinary flight would become the catalyst for a confrontation that would test his leadership in ways the $3 billion merger never could. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin of Skyline Airways Flight 447 had settled into the rhythmic hum of cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began adjusting to their temporary home among the clouds. Gabriel Mitchell had just opened a financial report when the first hint of trouble manifested. "This is your captain speaking." Richard Whitman's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're experiencing some light turbulence ahead. Nothing to worry about, but I'm turning the seatbelt sign back on as a precaution." The plane gave a slight shudder as it encountered the promised turbulence. A few rows behind Gabriel, a passenger, dropped his phone, which skittered down the aisle. The man, a well-dressed black gentleman in his 30s, unbuckled his seatbelt momentarily to retrieve it, then quickly returned to his seat. Flight attendant Amara Johnson approached him with professional courtesy. "Sir, please keep your seatbelt fastened when the sign is illuminated." "I apologize," the man replied. "My phone fell, and it has important work documents." Amara nodded understandingly. "Of course, sir. Next time, please use your call button and we'll help you." The exchange was perfectly ordinary, but what happened next was anything but. The cabin intercom clicked on again. "Folks, this is your captain again. I need to remind everyone that seatbelt signs aren't optional suggestions. They're for your safety." The announcement seemed disproportionately stern for such a minor infraction that had already been addressed. Gabriel glanced back to see the passenger looking embarrassed as nearby travelers stared. The intercom clicked off, but surprisingly, clicked back on almost immediately. What came next sent a chill through the cabin. "James, did you see that? Guy in 15C?" Captain Whitman's voice was clearly audible, speaking to his co-pilot but broadcasting to the entire aircraft. "These people never follow rules, always think they're special cases." There was a moment of confusion before passengers realized the pilot had inadvertently left the intercom on during what was meant to be a private conversation. "Richard, the intercom," the co-pilot's alarmed voice began. But Whitman continued, unaware. "That's why we need those special security checks for certain passengers. Should have made him go through twice at the gate. You know the type. They're always trouble on these Atlanta routes." The cabin froze in collective shock. The racial undertones were unmistakable. Gabriel felt his heartbeat quicken as anger and disbelief flooded his system. Around him, reactions varied dramatically. Shock on some faces, uncomfortable recognition on others, and on a disturbing number, subtle nods of agreement. The intercom abruptly cut off, followed by 10 seconds of devastating silence before First Officer Peterson's voice returned, strained and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the technical error with our announcement system. We'll be beginning our beverage service shortly. Thank you for your patience. The attempted cover-up only amplified the offense. Gabriel's finger hovered over the record button on his phone, capturing these moments for irrefutable documentation. He looked around the cabin, watching as passengers began urgent whispered conversations. The gentleman in 15C sat rigid with humiliation and anger. Amara caught Gabriel's eye from the galley, her expression a professional mask that couldn't quite hide her distress. She'd heard such comments before, Gabriel realized, perhaps many times. The thought made his blood boil further. As if sensing the temperature of the cabin rising, the co-pilot made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we anticipate a smooth remainder of our flight to Atlanta. We'll be landing in approximately 50 minutes. No mention of the incident. No proper apology. No acknowledgement of the harm just inflicted on dozens of passengers. A white woman across the aisle leaned toward Gabriel. Did he really just say that? In 2025, that's outrageous. Before Gabriel could respond, a man behind them interjected. He was just being honest. Security is security. The cabin was quickly dividing into factions, those outraged by the blatant racism, and those attempting to justify or minimize it. Gabriel remained silent, his CEO mind already calculating the potential damage to Skyline's reputation and culture, while his human heart burned with the familiar pain of bigotry. Dr. Washington, seated nearby, removed his reading glasses and addressed Gabriel directly. I've been flying for 40 years, and these attitudes haven't changed as much as we pretend. Just become more coded until moments like this. Gabriel nodded, still not revealing his position. Do you think they'll address it properly? I doubt it, Dr. Washington replied. They rarely do without pressure. As if confirming his assessment, Amara and another flight attendant began moving through the cabin, offering complimentary beverages and snacks, an apparent attempt to distract from the incident. The strategy wasn't working. Passengers were already typing furiously on phones, some circumventing the in-flight Wi-Fi paywall to share what had happened on social media. Gabriel noticed a young woman aiming her phone camera at the cockpit door, while another passenger cornered a flight attendant, demanding the captain's full name. The atmosphere had transformed from routine air travel to a pressure cooker of tensions that had nothing to do with altitude. Sir, can I get you anything? Amara asked as she reached Gabriel's row, her voice steady despite the situation. I'm fine, thank you, Gabriel replied, then added quietly, Has this happened before? Amara maintained her professional smile but gave the slightest nod before moving on. That single gesture confirmed what Gabriel had feared. This wasn't an isolated incident, but a symptom of a deeper problem within his airline. In the galley, Gabriel could see other crew members in heated, whispered discussion. One male flight attendant appeared to be defending the captain while two others looked disgusted. The division among his staff was another concerning revelation. Gabriel discreetly sent a text to his executive assistant. Need urgent call with legal team upon landing ATL. Serious incident on current flight. He didn't elaborate further, wanting to see how his company would respond without his direct intervention. 20 minutes passed with mounting tension. Passengers formed impromptu alliances, exchanging contact information and comparing recordings. Some were already drafting complaints on laptops. The passenger from 15C had moved to sit with another black traveler, both men speaking in low, intense tones. Finally, Captain Whitman's voice returned to the intercom, devoid of its earlier casualness. This is your captain speaking. I want to clarify that my earlier comments were not intended to be broadcast and were taken out of context. We at Skyline Airways value all our passengers equally. We'll be beginning our descent into Atlanta shortly. The non-apology only inflamed tensions further. A passenger shouted, That's not an apology. Others murmured in agreement. Gabriel remained outwardly calm while internally furious. This was his airline, built on principles of respect and inclusion, yet here was a captain casually undermining everything Skyline stood for. Worse, the attempted cover-up suggested a culture where such behavior might be tolerated behind closed doors. As the plane began its descent toward Atlanta, Gabriel made his decision. He would not immediately reveal himself. First, he wanted to see how his company handled this crisis. Without knowing the CEO was watching, the response would tell him everything about whether Skyline's values were truly embedded in its operations or merely corporate window dressing. The seatbelt sign illuminated again, this time for landing. Amara moved efficiently through the cabin, checking compliance. When she reached Gabriel, she leaned slightly closer than necessary. "I'm so sorry about this, sir," she whispered, her professional veneer cracking slightly to reveal genuine distress. "Don't be," Gabriel replied softly, "but I'd appreciate your perspective later." She gave a nearly imperceptible nod before continuing her duties. As the plane descended through clouds toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Gabriel could see passengers preparing for action upon landing, organizing contact information, comparing recordings, discussing next steps. Whatever Captain Richard Whitman had intended with his private comments, he had inadvertently created a unified force determined to hold Skyline Airways accountable. The irony wasn't lost on Gabriel. Tomorrow he was supposed to announce Skyline's greatest triumph, a merger that would make history in American business. Instead, he might be facing its greatest crisis, one that threatened not just the deal, but the very soul of the company he'd built. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan, and Gabriel looked out at the Atlanta skyline growing closer. Richard Whitman, unaware of exactly who was sitting in 2A, was about to learn the true meaning of accountability. The wheels of Flight 447 touched down on Atlanta's runway with a squeal of rubber against concrete, but the tension inside the cabin continued to rise like a plane still climbing to cruising altitude. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, passengers who would normally be gathering belongings and checking phones instead remained unusually focused on the events unfolding around them. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta," came First Officer Peterson's voice, notably taking over the arrival announcement from Captain Whitman. "Local time is 4:37 p.m. with clear skies and 74 degrees. Please remain seated, with seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate and the sign is turned off." Gabriel Mitchell observed the cabin with the calculated composure he'd perfected through years of high-stakes business negotiations. Across the aisle, Dr. Washington was already exchanging contact information with two other passengers. Behind him, the gentleman from 15C who had been the target of Whitman's remarks was speaking quietly but intensely into his phone. "This isn't over," Gabriel overheard him say. The whole plane heard it. Meanwhile, the flight attendants moved through the cabin with forced smiles that couldn't mask their discomfort. Some passengers accosted them with questions. "Who's your chief of operations? I want the pilot's full name. Does Skyline have a history of hiring racists?" Amara Johnson handled these confrontations with professional restraint, neither defending nor condemning her colleague, walking the impossible tightrope of company loyalty and basic human decency. As the plane approached the gate, Gabriel's phone vibrated with an incoming message. Madison Taylor, his PR director, had texted, "Picking up social media chatter about incident on Flight 447. Anything we should know?" So it had already begun. Before the plane had even reached the gate, Skyline's corporate radar was detecting the approaching storm. Gabriel didn't respond immediately, curious to see how his team would handle the crisis without his input. The aircraft docked with a gentle bump and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Unlike the usual rush to stand, many passengers remained seated, finishing recordings, exchanges of information, and social media posts. The atmosphere felt more like a strategy session than the end of a routine flight. "Excuse me," said a flight attendant Gabriel didn't recognize, approaching his seat with a practiced smile. "Mr. Mitchell, we've just received word that a Skyline representative will be meeting you at the gate." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. His cover was apparently blown, though he hadn't expected to maintain anonymity once they landed. "Thank, you," he replied neutrally. As passengers finally began to rise and collect their belongings, Gabriel noted Captain Whitman emerging from the cockpit, his face a mask of professional indifference as he nodded to departing passengers. When his eyes met Gabriel's, there was no recognition, just the generic courtesy extended to any first-class passenger. Have you ever witnessed someone say something offensive, then act like nothing happened? Hit like if you've been in a situation where someone refused to acknowledge their harmful words. Comment number 1 if you think Captain Whitman should immediately apologize to all passengers, or number 2 if you believe Skyline Airways should fire him on the spot. Subscribe to follow this story to its conclusion. What would you do if you were in Gabriel's position right now? The jet bridge connected with a soft thud, and the forward door opened. Gabriel remained seated, allowing other passengers to deplane. First, a strategic decision to observe reactions and give himself time to plan his next move. He noticed Amara discreetly watching him, understanding his intentions without words being exchanged. As the cabin emptied, Gabriel's mind flashed back to a similar incident from his early days building Skyline. He had been negotiating with potential investors when one had remarked, not realizing Gabriel could hear, "Are we really comfortable putting $50 million into a company run by someone like him?" The banker had apologized profusely when confronted, claiming he meant Gabriel's youth, not his race. Gabriel had walked away from the deal despite desperately needing the capital. "Sir?" Amara interrupted his thoughts. Everyone else has deplaned. Gabriel nodded and stood, gathering his carry-on. "Thank you, Amara. I appreciate your professionalism today." "Mr. Mitchell," she said quietly, checking that they were truly alone. "This isn't the first time. Captain Whitman has a reputation among the crew." This confirmation deepened Gabriel's concern. If one pilot felt comfortable making such remarks, what did that say about Skyline's culture when the CEO wasn't watching? As Gabriel stepped into the jet bridge, he saw a familiar figure waiting. Thomas Reynolds, Skyline's VP of Operations, a silver-haired executive with 30 years in the airline industry. His presence confirmed the seriousness with which corporate was treating the situation, though Reynolds's tight smile suggested damage control rather than genuine concern. "Gabriel," Reynolds greeted him with forced casualness, "I didn't realize you were on this flight. There's been some unfortunate chatter online." "I heard everything firsthand, Thomas," Gabriel replied coolly. "Where's Captain Whitman now?" "Being debriefed by HR," Reynolds said smoothly. "Just a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. We're already drafting a statement." The practiced ease of Reynolds' response troubled Gabriel more than the incident itself. It suggested a well-oiled machine for managing such misunderstandings rather than preventing them. As they entered the terminal, Gabriel saw a cluster of passengers from Flight 447 gathered near the gate, many still recording with phones. Dr. Washington appeared to be taking a leadership role, collecting contact information from others willing to file formal complaints. Meanwhile, Gabriel's phone buzzed continuously with messages from his executive team. From legal, aware of situation on 447, preparing response options. From Madison Taylor, PR, social media escalating, need your input on response strategy. From his chief of staff, CNN reaching out for comment re-incident. Also, North Star CEO called about rumors. The last message sent a jolt of concern through Gabriel. If tomorrow's merger partner was already getting wind of the incident, the $3 billion deal could be in jeopardy. "Gabriel, I suggest we discuss this privately," Reynolds said, gesturing toward the airline's executive lounge. "We have a standard protocol for these situations." "Standard protocol," Gabriel repeated, the phrase igniting something in him. "How often does this protocol get activated, Thomas?" Reynolds blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I just mean we have crisis management procedures." "That's not what I asked," Gabriel interrupted. "How many incidents like this has Skyline handled without my direct involvement?" Before Reynolds could answer, a commotion near the gate drew their attention. Captain Whitman had emerged from the jet bridge flanked by 2 Skyline managers. The passenger from seat 15C immediately approached him, phone recording the confrontation. "You owe me and everyone on that flight an apology," the passenger demanded. "What you said was racist, plain and simple." Whitman's response was cool and practiced. "Sir, I apologize if you misinterpreted my comments. They were taken out of context during a private conversation." "Misinterpreted?" another passenger interjected. "You said these people and special security checks. What context makes that appropriate?" Gabriel watched as Whitman maintained his composure, offering non-apologies while the managers tried to usher him away from the growing crowd. The scene confirmed Gabriel's suspicions. Whitman had navigated similar situations before and knew exactly how to avoid taking real responsibility. "Thomas," Gabriel said quietly, "I want complete access to Captain Whitman's personnel file immediately. Any complaints, investigations, everything." Reynolds hesitated. "Gabriel, you know HR has confidentiality protocols." "I'm not asking, Thomas. I'm telling you what's going to happen next." Gabriel's tone left no room for negotiation. "And I want to know why I'm only learning about this pattern of behavior from a flight attendant rather than my executive team." As they spoke, Gabriel noticed Dr. Washington approaching, having spotted him in conversation with Reynolds. "Excuse me," Dr. Washington said, extending his hand. "Dr. Elijah Washington, civil rights attorney. Are you with Skyline Management?" "Gabriel Mitchell," he replied, accepting the handshake without revealing his position. "Yes, I work for Skyline." "Then perhaps you can explain why your captain feels comfortable making racist announcements and offering non-apologies," Dr. Washington said, his dignified tone belying the sharpness of his words. Reynolds stepped forward. "Sir, we take these allegations very seriously." "They aren't allegations," Gabriel cut in. "I heard it myself, as did everyone on that plane." Dr. Washington studied Gabriel with new interest. Refreshing to hear someone from corporate acknowledging the reality. Most of these situations get buried under legal jargon and empty promises of internal reviews. The conversation was interrupted by Gabriel's phone ringing, the North Star CEO calling directly. The merger announcement was less than 18 hours away, and the timing couldn't be worse. "I need to take this," Gabriel said, stepping away slightly. As he answered the call, Gabriel watched Reynolds attempt to placate Dr. Washington with corporate platitudes. In the background, Captain Whitman was being escorted toward an employees-only area, away from the passengers still demanding accountability. The scene crystallized everything wrong with how corporations typically handled such incidents: the protection of those in power, the managed apologies, the quick removal of the problem from public view. Gabriel had created Skyline to be different, yet here was his company following the same shameful playbook. His merger partner's concerned voice came through the phone. "Gabriel, we're seeing some concerning social media about one of your flights. Is there something we should discuss before tomorrow's announcement?" In that moment, Gabriel Mitchell faced the defining decision of his career. He could follow the standard corporate crisis management approach: minimize, manage, move on, potentially saving the merger but betraying his principles. Or he could demand real accountability, risking the biggest deal of his life but preserving the soul of the company he'd built. As Reynolds continued damage control and Whitman disappeared behind secure doors, Gabriel made his choice. "Actually," he told the North Star CEO, "there is something we need to discuss. But first, I need to address a situation here that reflects the true values of Skyline Airways, one way or another." The next few hours would reveal whether those values existed only in mission statements and marketing materials, or if they truly guided the company's actions when tested. For Captain Richard Whitman, the realization that the black CEO had been aboard his flight was about to become the least of his concerns. The executive lounge of Skyline Airways stood empty except for Gabriel Mitchell, who had requested privacy to make several crucial calls. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlanta airport stretched before him, planes taking off and landing, ground crews scurrying about, the ceaseless rhythm of an industry he had helped transform. Now, everything he had built faced a defining moment. Gabriel loosened his tie and placed his phone on the table, switching it to speaker mode. "Janelle, are you still there?" "Yes, Gabriel," replied Janelle Cooper, Skyline's chief legal officer. "I've reviewed the recordings passengers have posted. The situation is problematic." "That's putting it mildly," Gabriel said, pacing the room. "I need to know if there have been previous complaints about Captain Whitman." A pause. "I'd have to check with HR for specific—" "Janelle," Gabriel interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "I'm not asking as a curious CEO, I need the truth now. Amara Johnson, one of our senior flight attendants, already told me Whitman has a reputation among the crew." Another longer pause. "There have been 3 formal complaints in the past. 18 months. All were handled according to union guidelines and company policy. Meaning what, exactly? Verbal warnings, sensitivity training, documentation in his file. Janelle's discomfort was audible even through the phone speaker. Gabriel, with the pilot's union contract. I'm familiar with the contract, Gabriel said. What I'm trying to understand is why a pilot with 3 formal complaints was still flying my airline, still representing Skyline to our passengers, and still creating a hostile environment for our crew. The incidents were classified as minor, infractions that didn't warrant termination under current policies, Janelle explained, her legal training evident in her measured response. Gabriel stopped pacing. And who makes those classifications? HR in consultation with operations. Thomas Reynolds has final sign-off on pilot disciplinary matters. The pieces were falling into place. Thomas Reynolds, his VP of operations, had been notably quick to escort Whitman away and push for standard protocols. Gabriel recalled Reynolds' frequent resistance to diversity initiatives, always couched in terms of operational efficiency rather than outright opposition. I need those complaint files sent to my secure email immediately, Gabriel instructed. And I want to know who else has multiple complaints that have been classified away. Gabriel, the merger announcement is tomorrow, Janelle reminded him gently. Perhaps we should focus on containing this situation until after. We're not containing anything, Gabriel interrupted. That's exactly the problem. We've been containing rather than addressing. After ending the call with Janelle, Gabriel phoned Madison Taylor, his PR director. Madison, I need you to hold off on any statement about Flight 447. Gabriel, social media is exploding, Madison protested. We need to get ahead of this. We will, but not with the usual corporate non-apology. I'm handling this personally. Next, Gabriel called his chief of staff, arranging to postpone the merger announcement by 48 hours, citing unexpected operational matters requiring immediate attention. The North Star CEO had been understanding but concerned during their earlier conversation. The delay would only increase that concern. As Gabriel ended his calls, the lounge door opened and Amara Johnson entered tentatively. Mr. Mitchell, you asked to speak with me. Amara, thank you for coming. Gabriel gestured to a chair. Please sit down. And it's Gabriel. She sat primly on the edge of the seat, still in her flight attendant uniform. I've worked for Skyline for 11 years, she began without preamble. What happened today wasn't an isolated incident. So I'm learning, Gabriel said grimly. Tell me what you've experienced or witnessed. For the next 20 minutes, Amara detailed a pattern of behavior from Captain Whitman and several other senior pilots, dismissive treatment of black crew members, jokes about passengers from certain neighborhoods or with non-English accents, comments about diversity hires lowering standards. Most flight attendants just try to avoid certain pilots, Amara explained. We request schedule changes or switch flights when possible. And when you've reported these incidents? Amara's expression tightened. I filed a formal complaint last year after Captain Whitman referred to me as "you people" during pre-flight preparations. I received an email saying it had been investigated and addressed. 2 weeks later, I was assigned to his flight again. Nothing had changed. Gabriel's phone buzzed with an incoming email, the complaint files from Janelle. He quickly scanned them, his expression darkening. The 3 complaints had indeed been documented, but the resolution for each was virtually identical. A conversation with HR, a notation in the file, a recommendation for the company's online diversity training module. Most troubling was Thomas Reynolds' assessment attached to each complaint, not actionable beyond standard protocol, and insufficient grounds for serious disciplinary action given pilot safety record and seniority. Gabriel looked up from his phone to find Amara watching him intently. You're going to handle this the same way, aren't you? She asked, resignation in her voice. He'll get another note in his file, maybe a week's suspension, and then everything goes back to normal. Her lack of faith in institutional change struck Gabriel deeply. This woman had dedicated 11 years to Skyline, yet had no confidence that even the CEO could fix the systemic problems she faced daily. No, Amara, Gabriel said firmly. That's not what's going to happen. But I need to understand the full scope of the problem. He showed her his phone screen displaying the 3 complaints. Are there others who experienced similar treatment, but didn't file formal complaints? Amara laughed without humor. Most don't bother reporting anymore. What's the point? The union protects the pilots, and management protects itself. Would these people speak to me directly, today? Amara studied him, weighing his sincerity. Some might, if they believed it would actually make a difference. Make some calls, Gabriel instructed. Anyone willing to share their experiences. Ask them to meet us here in 2 hours. I'll ensure they're paid for their time and that there's no retaliation. As Amara left to make her calls, Gabriel returned to his review of the complaint files. The pattern was undeniable. Whitman's behavior had been consistently excused by Reynolds, with HR following his lead. It wasn't just one problematic pilot. It was a system designed to protect certain employees at the expense of others. The door opened again, and Thomas Reynolds entered, his expression a mixture of concern and calculation. Gabriel, we've drafted a statement addressing the incident. Legal has approved it. I've instructed Madison not to release any statement yet, Gabriel replied. Reynolds frowned. Gabriel, with respect, we need to get ahead of this story. It's standard crisis management. That's the second time you've used that phrase. Standard. Tell me, Thomas, is it also standard to bury multiple complaints against the same pilot? Reynolds stiffened. Personnel matters are handled according to established protocols. I've seen the files, Gabriel interrupted, holding up his phone. 3 complaints in 18 months, all classified as minor infractions despite clear patterns of racist behavior. Those complaints were thoroughly investigated, Reynolds insisted. The incidents didn't rise to the level of termination under our policies or the union contract. And who determined that? You did, Thomas. Every single time. Reynolds' professional demeanor cracked slightly. Gabriel, you hired me to manage operations. Pilot retention is critical in this industry. Whitman has a perfect safety record. I don't care if he can land on a postage stamp in a hurricane, Gabriel cut in. Safety is the minimum expectation. It doesn't excuse bigotry. This is about the merger, isn't it? Reynolds countered. You're worried North Star will back out over one unfortunate incident, but we can manage this. A careful statement, a short suspension for Whitman, maybe some publicity around our diversity initiatives. Stop, Gabriel commanded, his voice quiet but forceful. This isn't about saving the merger. This is about what kind of company Skyline actually is versus what we pretend to be. Reynolds' expression hardened. The company is what it needs to be to survive in this industry. You may have built Skyline with certain ideals, Gabriel, but the reality of running an airline requires pragmatism. The conversation was interrupted by Gabriel's phone ringing. Dr. Washington calling. Gabriel answered, putting it on speaker. Mr. Mitchell, I've spoken with 27 passengers from Flight 447 who are prepared to file formal complaints with the FAA and pursue legal action against Skyline, Dr. Washington reported. However, I wanted to give you the opportunity to address this properly first. I appreciate that, Dr. Washington, Gabriel replied. I'm developing a comprehensive response. Could you meet me in the executive lounge in 2 hours to discuss it? After confirming the meeting and ending the call, Gabriel turned back to Reynolds, whose face had paled at the mention of 27 potential legal actions. Thomas, I need Captain Whitman's complete file, including performance reviews, route assignments, and any informal notes or counseling sessions. Also, I want files for any pilot with more than 1 complaint in the past 5 years. Gabriel, that's not a request, Gabriel finished firmly. And I'll need access to all email correspondence between you, HR, and the pilots' union regarding complaint resolutions. Reynolds' jaw tightened. You're overreacting to one incident that's being magnified by social media. This could do serious damage to Skyline's reputation and operations. No, Thomas. Allowing racism to fester unchecked in my airline is what damages Skyline. Now, those files, please. As Reynolds left to comply, however reluctantly, Gabriel returned to the window, watching a Skyline jet taxi toward takeoff. The company logo, a stylized horizon with wings, had been his personal design, symbolizing limitless possibility and forward progress. Had it all been an illusion? Had he been so focused on external growth and success that he'd failed to ensure his company truly embodied the values he espoused? The thought was deeply troubling. Gabriel's phone buzzed with a text from Amara. 8 crew members willing to meet, some bringing written accounts from others too afraid to come in person. The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing. Gabriel opened his contacts and placed one more call to Wallace Kingston, head of the pilots' union. It was time to understand all dimensions of the problem he was facing. As the call connected, Gabriel steeled himself for what promised to be a difficult conversation. The next few hours would determine not just Richard Whitman's fate or even the merger's future, but the very soul of Skyline Airways. Gabriel had built his career by transforming challenges into opportunities, but this would test even his considerable abilities. The sun began to set over the Atlanta airport, casting long shadows across the tarmac. In 2 hours, Gabriel would meet with crew members, Dr. Washington, and the affected passengers. By then, he needed more than righteous anger. He needed a plan that would deliver real justice and meaningful change. The Skyline Airways Executive Lounge had transformed from a quiet sanctuary for privileged travelers into an impromptu tribunal. 23 people sat in a semicircle facing Gabriel Mitchell. 8 crew members, including Amara Johnson, Dr. E. Elijah Washington with 11 passengers from Flight 447, and 4 Skyline executives who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the meeting progressed. So after I filed my complaint about Captain Whitman calling me affirmative action in action, I was scheduled for fewer premium routes, said Marcus Coleman, a flight attendant with 8 years at Skyline. My performance reviews suddenly included vague comments about attitude and team dynamics. Gabriel made another note in his leather-bound notebook, his expression neutral despite his internal fury. For the past 40 minutes, crew members had shared experiences that painted a disturbing picture, not of isolated incidents, but of systemic problems protecting problematic pilots. "Thank you, Marcus," Gabriel said. "I appreciate your candor." He turned to the executives seated to his right, Thomas Reynolds, HR Director Patricia Winters, and Chief Operations Officer Bradley Foster. "Did any of you follow up on these pattern changes in Mr. Coleman's assignments after his complaint?" The 3 exchanged glances before Patricia spoke. "Scheduling is handled by operations. HR doesn't typically monitor route assignments in relation to complaints." "And operations?" Gabriel asked, looking directly at Reynolds. "Route assignments fluctuate based on numerous factors," Reynolds replied smoothly. "It would be speculative to connect them to any complaint process." Gabriel made another note. Yet Mr. Coleman's premium route assignments dropped by 63% in the 3 months following his complaint. "That doesn't strike you as noteworthy?" "I wasn't aware of that specific percentage," Reynolds said, his discomfort becoming visible. "I was," Gabriel stated flatly. "I reviewed the data before this meeting." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Gabriel hadn't called this meeting to gather information he didn't already have. He was creating a public record of his executives' responses. A knock at the door interrupted the tense moment. Gabriel's assistant entered, whispering something in his ear before departing. Gabriel nodded and addressed the room. "Captain Whitman has arrived at the airport for his next scheduled flight tomorrow morning. Security has respectfully asked him to join us instead." Reynolds sat forward. "Gabriel, ambushing Whitman like this is completely inappropriate. He's entitled to union representation and proper notice for any disciplinary meeting." "This isn't a disciplinary meeting, Thomas," Gabriel replied calmly. "It's a fact-finding discussion. And I've already spoken with Wallace Kingston at the union. He's on his way as well." Dr. Washington, who had been quietly observing, nodded approvingly. "Transparency benefits everyone, Mr. Mitchell." "Gabriel, please," he responded, standing as the door opened again. Captain Richard Whitman entered, his commanding presence diminished somewhat by the surprise evident on his face. Behind him came Wallace Kingston, the pilots' union representative, AEO, former pilot himself with 30 years in the industry and a reputation for aggressive defense of his members. "What's going on here?" Whitman demanded, taking in the assembled group. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized faces from Flight 447. "Captain Whitman," Gabriel greeted him. "Thank you for joining us. We're discussing the incident on today's flight from Chicago and some broader concerns about Skyline's culture." "This is completely irregular," Kingston interjected. "Captain Whitman hasn't been given proper notice or opportunity to prepare for any kind of hearing." "Again, not a hearing," Gabriel clarified. "Just a conversation that I believe benefits from having all perspectives present. Please, both of you join us." 2 chairs had been positioned at the edge of the semicircle. Whitman and Kingston exchanged glances before reluctantly taking their seats. "Now, Captain Whitman," Gabriel continued, "I was a passenger on Flight 447 today. I heard your announcement regarding special security checks for certain passengers and your comments about these people." Whitman's expression tightened. "As I've already explained to HR, my comments were taken out of context during a private conversation that was accidentally broadcast." "What exactly is the correct context for those remarks?" asked the passenger from seat 15C, who had introduced himself earlier as Michael Townsend, a software engineer from Chicago. "Aviation security is complex," Whitman replied stiffly. "My comments reflected operational realities, not any personal bias." "Operational realities," Gabriel repeated. "Please elaborate on which operational realities necessitate special security checks based on a passenger's appearance." Kingston intervened. "My client isn't required to justify operational judgments in this setting." "Your client made racist statements over the intercom of my airline," Gabriel countered, his calm demeanor belying the steel in his voice. "I'm giving him the opportunity to explain himself before I decide on next steps." "And you are?" Kingston asked, clearly unaware of Gabriel's identity. "Gabriel Mitchell. I'm the CEO and founder of Skyline Airways." The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Whitman's face drained of color as recognition dawned. Kingston's expression flickered between shock and calculation. "Mr. Mitchell," Kingston recovered quickly. "While I appreciate your concern, there are established protocols for addressing complaints against pilots. Captain Whitman has an exemplary safety record spanning 28 years. Any misunderstanding about a private comment—" "Stop," Gabriel interrupted. "Let's be very clear. There was no misunderstanding. The comments were explicitly biased. They were broadcast to the entire aircraft, and they violated Skyline's core values. One incident shouldn't erase 28 years of service," Kingston argued. "It wasn't one incident," Amara stated, finding her voice. "Many of us have experienced or witnessed similar behavior for years." Kingston's eyes narrowed. "Unsubstantiated allegations. 3 formal complaints in 18 months, Gabriel cut in. "All documented, all minimized and dismissed by management." He gestured to the HR files spread on the table before him. Whitman looked to Reynolds, who avoided his gaze. The realization that his history was exposed shifted something in the pilot's demeanor. "Those complaints were handled according to policy," Whitman said defensively. "I completed all required sensitivity training." "Which clearly had no impact," Gabriel observed. "Tell me, Captain Whitman, do you believe your comments today were appropriate?" "They weren't meant to be heard by passengers." "That's not what I asked. Do you believe referring to these people and suggesting certain passengers should undergo extra security screening based on their appearance is appropriate, whether heard by passengers or not?" Whitman hesitated, looking to Kingston for guidance. The union rep gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I apologize if my words caused offense," Whitman offered, the textbook non-apology. "It was never my intention to make anyone uncomfortable." Dr. Washington leaned forward. "Captain, I've been practicing civil rights law for 30 years. I can assure you that your intentions are legally irrelevant. The impact of your words and actions is what matters, both legally and morally." Kingston bristled. "This is becoming an inquisition. If Skyline wants to pursue disciplinary action, there are contractual procedures that must be followed." "We're well aware of the procedures," Gabriel assured him. "What concerns me more immediately is understanding whether Captain Whitman recognizes the harm caused and whether he's capable of representing Skyline Airways going forward. That sounds like you've already decided on termination, Kingston accused. I've decided nothing yet, Gabriel replied. I'm gathering information, including Captain Whitman's current perspective on his actions. All eyes turned to Whitman, who seemed to be calculating his options. Finally, he spoke with unexpected candor. Look, aviation has certain realities. Security protocols exist for a reason. Some passengers fit profiles that require additional attention. That's not racism, it's risk management. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Rather than backtracking, Whitman had essentially doubled down on his prejudice while attempting to dress it in professional jargon. Captain Whitman, Gabriel said quietly, the passenger you singled out today is a software engineer with government security clearance who flies weekly for his job. What profile exactly did he fit that warranted your comments? Whitman's jaw tightened. I was speaking generally about security protocols. No, you weren't, Michael Townsend interjected. You specifically referenced me, that guy in 15C, after I retrieved my phone during light turbulence. The room fell silent as Whitman finally seemed to recognize the corner he had backed himself into. Kingston attempted damage control. My client acknowledges his choice of words was poor and offers his sincere apology. Skyline has procedures for addressing such matters, typically beginning with written warnings and additional training. Gabriel studied Kingston thoughtfully. Mr. Kingston, how many pilots in your union have received multiple complaints for similar behaviors? Kingston's expression hardened. That information would be confidential. Not from me, it isn't, Gabriel countered. I've requested a full audit of all pilot complaints and their resolutions over the past 5 years. That would be an overreaction to one incident, Kingston protested. Would it? Gabriel asked. Because what I'm hearing suggests a pattern that extends beyond Captain Whitman, a system that minimizes bias, protects those who display it, and punishes those who report it. As if on cue, the door opened again, and Janelle Cooper, Skyline's chief legal officer, entered with a tablet in hand. She approached Gabriel and whispered briefly in his ear. It seems we have additional information, Gabriel announced. Ms. Cooper has completed an initial review of pilot complaints. In the past 5 years, Skyline has received 47 formal complaints alleging biased or discriminatory behavior by pilots. Not a single one resulted in termination. Only 3 led to temporary suspensions. The remainder were addressed with verbal warnings or online training modules. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Gabriel continued, his voice measured but intense. More troublingly, 28 of those complaints were against just 7 pilots, suggesting clear patterns of behavior that were systematically ignored. Kingston attempted to regain control of the narrative. Formal termination requires meeting a high standard of evidence. The union contract protects pilots from arbitrary dismissal. The contract doesn't protect racist behavior, Gabriel countered. It ensures due process, which is happening right now. This is hardly due process, Kingston scoffed. A hastily assembled meeting with no formal notice. Due process doesn't always mean what's convenient for those in power, Dr. Washington interjected. It means fairness and transparency, which Mr. Mitchell is providing by including all stakeholders in this discussion. The confrontation was interrupted by Gabriel's phone buzzing with an incoming call. The North Star CEO again. The merger remained in limbo, $3 billion and countless jobs hanging in the balance while Gabriel addressed this more fundamental issue. I need to take this, Gabriel said, stepping aside momentarily. As he moved toward the window for privacy, he heard Kingston speaking urgently to Whitman. Thomas Reynolds approached them, his expression tense. The alliances were becoming clear. Reynolds, Kingston, and Whitman united in their desire to minimize the situation and preserve the status quo. Gabriel answered his phone, keeping his voice low. James, I apologize for the delay in our discussions. Gabriel, the North Star CEO replied. Our board is expressing serious concerns about the social media storm. The New York Times is now reporting on the incident. We need to understand how you're addressing this before proceeding. I'm handling it personally, Gabriel assured him. In fact, I'm in a meeting right now that will determine Skyline's approach, not just to this incident but to our entire culture going forward. The merger announcement may need to be delayed further, Gabriel finished. This is about more than public relations, James. It's about whether Skyline truly represents the values both our companies claim to uphold. A pause. I understand. Keep me informed. As Gabriel ended the call, he turned to find the room watching him expectantly. The next few minutes would determine not just Captain Whitman's fate, but the future of Skyline Airways itself. Captain Whitman, Gabriel said, returning to his position at the center of the group. I've heard enough to make an initial decision. Before I announce it, is there anything else you'd like to say? Whitman glanced at Kingston, then at Reynolds, before facing Gabriel directly. For a moment, it seemed he might offer a genuine reflection or apology. Instead, his expression hardened with defiance. I've given 28 years to this industry, the last 5 to Skyline. I've never had a safety incident or violation. If a few oversensitive people can't handle the realities of aviation security, that's not my problem. This witch hunt says more about the current climate than about anything I've done. The room went completely still. Gabriel nodded once, almost sadly. Thank you for your honesty, Captain Whitman. It makes my decision much clearer. The executive lounge of Skyline Airways had transformed into an unexpected battlefield, with traditional power structures suddenly inverted. Captain Richard Whitman, accustomed to the unquestioned authority of the cockpit, found himself facing something entirely unfamiliar. Genuine accountability. Captain Whitman, Gabriel Mitchell stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built a transportation empire. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending formal termination proceedings. Whitman's face flushed with anger. You can't do that without following union protocols. Tell him, Wallace. Kingston stepped forward, union contract already in hand. Mr. Mitchell, while we acknowledge the seriousness of the situation, the collective bargaining agreement clearly states that termination requires a formal investigation period, written documentation of charges, and an opportunity for the pilot to respond with union representation. All of which will happen, Gabriel assured him calmly. The suspension is immediate and within my authority as CEO. The termination process will follow all contractual requirements. This is a gross overreaction, Whitman protested. One comment taken out of context. 3 formal complaints, Gabriel corrected. Plus the numerous incidents witnesses have just described. And your own words moments ago make it abundantly clear that you see nothing wrong with your behavior. Thomas Reynolds, sensing the shift in power, attempted to position himself as a mediator. Gabriel, perhaps a cooling-off period would be beneficial. Captain Whitman could take voluntary leave while we… Thomas, Gabriel interrupted, you've had 5 years to address this issue appropriately. Your time for suggestions has passed. Reynolds stiffened at the public rebuke. I've always acted in the company's best interests. Have you? Gabriel challenged. Because protecting employees who create hostile environments for colleagues and passengers doesn't serve Skyline's interests. It undermines everything we claim to stand for. The confrontation was interrupted by a commotion outside the lounge. Through the glass doors they could see a crowd gathering, passengers, airport staff, and what appeared to be several journalists with cameras. The story's spreading, Dr. Washington observed. Social media moves faster than corporate damage control. This is what happens when you make hasty decisions based on public pressure, Kingston argued, gesturing toward the crowd. A measured private response would prevent this circus. Gabriel studied the union representative thoughtfully. Mr. Kingston, how many discrimination complaints has your union received about pilots in the past decade? Kingston's expression tightened. That information is confidential. Let me rephrase, Gabriel continued. How many pilots has your union defended against discrimination complaints regardless of merit as a matter of policy? We represent all our members equally, Kingston replied stiffly. That's our job. Even when the evidence suggests they've violated both company policy and basic human decency, Kingston squared his shoulders. Due process applies to everyone, Mr. Mitchell, even those accused of unpopular behavior. Due process is not the same as automatic defense regardless of facts, Gabriel countered. But let's set that aside for the moment. He turned back to Whitman. Captain, please surrender your Skyline credentials to security. You'll be escorted from the premises and contacted regarding next steps in the formal process. Whitman looked to Kingston, who nodded reluctantly. The captain unpinned his wings and removed his ID badge, his movements stiff with suppressed rage. 28 years of perfect safety, Whitman said bitterly. Thrown away because someone's feelings got hurt. Gabriel's expression remained impassive. Your safety record isn't why you're being terminated. Your repeated demeaning of fellow employees and passengers is. Excellence in one area doesn't excuse bigotry in another. Have you ever seen someone with power suddenly realize they've lost it? Hit, like if you've witnessed a moment when someone's privilege couldn't protect them anymore. Comment number 1 if you believe Gabriel is handling the situation correctly, or number 2 if you think he's being too harsh on Captain Whitman. Subscribe if you want to see more stories about accountability in the workplace. What do you think will happen to the $3 billion merger now that Gabriel has taken this stand? As security personnel approached to escort Whitman out, Gabriel noticed Amara Johnson and the other crew members watching with expressions ranging from shock to vindication. For many, this was likely the first time they'd seen someone in Whitman's position face real consequences. The moment carried Gabriel back to his early career, a boardroom in Chicago, where he'd presented a flawless business plan only to be told by a silver-haired executive that he wasn't quite right for the opportunity. The coded language of rejection was familiar to anyone who had faced systemic barriers, but the power to challenge it was rare. Mr. Mitchell, Dr. Washington approached as Whitman was led away. This is an important first step, but systemic problems require systemic solutions. I agree completely, Gabriel replied, which is why I'm not finished. He turned to address the remaining executives. Thomas, Patricia, I'll need your complete files regarding all discrimination complaints against pilots, flight attendants, and ground staff for the past 5 years. I want to know how many were substantiated, what actions were taken, and whether those reporting experienced any form of retaliation. Reynolds paled slightly. Gabriel, that's an enormous undertaking that could disrupt operations. Then you'd better get started, Gabriel cut in. I expect preliminary findings by morning. Patricia Winters, the HR director who had remained largely silent, finally spoke up. Mr. Mitchell, with all due respect, HR procedures are designed to balance employee rights with company policies. We've followed established protocols that have clearly failed, Gabriel interrupted. When the same individuals accumulate multiple complaints with minimal consequences, the protocols aren't working. As the executives reluctantly departed to begin the audit, Gabriel noticed Wallace Kingston lingering, his expression calculating. The union representative approached once the others had left. Mitchell, you're making a serious mistake, Kingston said, his voice low. The pilots' union won't stand for this kind of unilateral action. We can make operations very difficult for Skyline. Are you threatening a work action over the termination of a pilot with documented patterns of racist behavior? Gabriel asked, making no effort to lower his voice. Kingston glanced around, aware that crew members and passengers were still present. I'm simply pointing out potential consequences. Pilot morale. If pilot morale is damaged by holding bigots accountable, we have bigger problems than I thought, Gabriel replied. But let me be clear. I welcome the conversation about where the union stands on discrimination. Shall we have that discussion publicly? Kingston's expression hardened as he recognized the trap. Supporting Whitman too strongly would position the union as defending racist behavior, a public relations nightmare. We'll be reviewing our options, Kingston said finally, turning to leave. As the door closed behind him, Amara approached Gabriel. I never thought I'd see this day, she admitted. But what happens now? Kingston isn't wrong about the union's power. Now we leverage momentum for real change, Gabriel replied. Not just removing one pilot, but addressing the system that protected him. Dr. Washington rejoined them, his legal mind already working on next steps. Mr. Mitchell, you have a unique opportunity here. Most companies address these issues reactively and privately. You could set a new standard for transparency and accountability. That's exactly what I intend to do, Gabriel confirmed. Dr. Washington, would you be willing to help shape that approach? Your expertise would be invaluable. Before Dr. Washington could respond, Gabriel's phone rang again. Madison Taylor, his PR director, calling with increasing urgency. Gabriel, we need a statement immediately, Madison said when he answered. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox are all running the story. The pilots' union has already released a statement expressing concern about hasty judgments and disregard for established procedures. They work quickly, Gabriel observed dryly. The North Star board is meeting in emergency session, Madison continued. Their stock is down 3% in after-hours trading based on merger uncertainty. Gabriel took a deep breath. The financial implications were mounting by the minute, yet he felt more certain of his course than ever. Madison, draft a statement announcing Captain Whitman's suspension pending termination. State clearly that Skyline has zero tolerance for discrimination and is conducting a comprehensive review of all related complaints and procedures. Add that I'll be personally addressing the media tomorrow morning. What about the merger announcement? Delayed indefinitely until we put our own house in order. After ending the call, Gabriel turned back to the remaining group, crew members, passengers, and Dr. Washington, all watching him with various degrees of hope and skepticism. I owe all of you an apology, Gabriel said, surprising them. As CEO, the culture of Skyline is ultimately my responsibility. The fact that these problems persisted without my knowledge indicates a failure of leadership on my part. You can't monitor every employee, one flight attendant offered. No, but I can ensure systems exist to properly address problems when they arise, Gabriel countered. Clearly, those systems have failed. Michael Townsend, the passenger from 15C who had been the target of Whitman's comments, spoke up. What happens to the others? You mentioned 7 pilots with multiple complaints. A fair question, Gabriel acknowledged. Each case will be reviewed thoroughly, but with a fresh perspective and higher standards. Those found to have engaged in similar patterns of behavior will face appropriate consequences. And the executives who protected them? Amara asked pointedly. Gabriel's expression was grim, but resolved. The same standards apply to everyone, regardless of position. As night fell over Atlanta, the impromptu meeting gradually dispersed. Gabriel remained in the lounge, working with his executive team remotely to prepare for the following day. The $3 billion merger hung in the balance, along with Skyline's reputation and future. Around midnight, his phone rang again. James Carter, North Star's CEO. Gabriel, Carter began without preamble, our board has concerns about proceeding with the merger given today's developments. I understand completely, Gabriel replied, preparing himself for the collapse of the deal he'd worked 18 months to secure. However, Carter continued unexpectedly, I personally believe your handling of this situation demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership we want to partner with. Gabriel paused, surprised by the direction of the conversation. You're not concerned about the negative publicity? Short-term publicity is fleeting, Carter replied. Corporate culture is lasting. One of our key considerations in this merger was whether Skyline's values aligned with ours. Your willingness to prioritize those values over expediency answers that question definitively. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Carter offering his full support for Gabriel's approach. By the time they hung up, the merger wasn't just salvaged. It was strengthened by a new level of mutual respect and shared purpose. As Gabriel finally prepared to leave the airport for his hotel, he encountered Amara in the terminal, changed, out of her uniform but looking as though she had more to say. I didn't get a chance to thank you, she said simply. For doing what should have been done long ago? Gabriel shook his head. No thanks necessary. You risked a $3 billion deal today, Amara pointed out. Most executives would have handled this quietly after securing the merger. Gabriel considered this. Perhaps that's why we need more diversity in leadership. People who understand that some principles aren't negotiable, regardless of the price tag. As they parted ways, Gabriel reflected on the day's extraordinary developments. What had begun as a routine flight had evolved into a defining moment for his company and his leadership. The comfortable power dynamics that had protected people, like Richard Whitman for decades, had been reversed, not through revolution, but through the simple application of accountability. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the media storm, potential union resistance, the detailed audit of past complaints. But for the first time, Gabriel felt confident that Skyline was truly embodying the values it had always claimed to represent. The power shift wasn't just about one CEO disciplining one pilot. It was about fundamentally rebalancing a system that had too long protected the privileged at the expense of the vulnerable. That rebalancing had only just begun, but the direction was now irrevocably set. Dawn broke over Atlanta with the promise of a day unlike any other in Skyline Airways history. Gabriel Mitchell stood at the window of his hotel suite, watching the early morning flights taking off and landing with clockwork precision. Each represented hundreds of lives temporarily entrusted to his company, passengers and crew alike deserving of safety, respect, and dignity. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from Janelle Cooper, his chief legal officer. Preliminary audit complete. Findings more extensive than anticipated. Urgent meeting needed before press conference. Gabriel's stomach tightened. He had suspected the audit would reveal systemic issues, but Janelle's message suggested something even more troubling. He replied immediately, arranging to meet at Skyline's Atlanta offices in 30 minutes. After a quick shower and change into a fresh suit, Gabriel headed downstairs where his driver waited. News vans were already gathered outside the hotel. Word had spread about the morning's press conference addressing the incident on Flight 447. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," said Robert, his regular Atlanta driver. "Quite a storm brewing." "More than you know, Robert," Gabriel replied, sliding into the back seat. "Skyline offices first, then the airport for the press conference." As they drove, Gabriel reviewed the latest updates from his executive team. Social media metrics showed the incident had been mentioned over 3 million times in the past 18 hours. The hashtag Skyline Racism was trending nationally. Competing airlines were already running subtle recruitment campaigns targeting Skyline's pilots, anticipating potential departures following stricter accountability measures. Most concerning was an email from the North Star board chair requesting a private call before the press conference. Despite CEO James Carter's supportive stance the previous night, the board clearly remained nervous about associating with a company in crisis. The car pulled up to Skyline's regional headquarters, a sleek glass building near the airport. Security escorted Gabriel through a private entrance to avoid the journalists already gathering in the lobby. In the main conference room, Janelle Cooper waited with Madison Taylor, PR director, and surprisingly, Amara Johnson. "Thank you for coming in early, Amara," Gabriel greeted her. "I appreciate your continued insights." "Amara has been instrumental in our overnight audit," Janelle explained. "Her institutional knowledge helped us identify patterns we might have missed." Gabriel nodded appreciatively and took a seat at the head of the table. "What have you found?" Janelle placed a tablet before him. "The complete findings are detailed here, but the summary is disturbing. In the past 5 years, we've identified 94 total complaints alleging discriminatory behavior, nearly double the 47 formal complaints initially reported." "How did we miss half the complaints?" Gabriel asked, scrolling through the document. "They were classified differently," Janelle explained. "Many were labeled as interpersonal conflicts or communication issues, rather than discrimination complaints, effectively hiding them from our initial search parameters." "That classification was deliberately misleading," Amara added. "It ensured they wouldn't trigger the formal discrimination complaint process." Gabriel continued reading, his expression darkening. 7 pilots with multiple complaints against them, all still flying. 17 flight attendants who filed complaints subsequently received negative performance reviews or reduced premium route assignments. "There's more," Janelle said quietly. "We found emails between Thomas Reynolds and Wallace Kingston discussing specific strategies for handling discrimination complaints against senior pilots." She pulled up an email thread on the conference room screen. Gabriel read it silently, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. The correspondence detailed explicit plans to reclassify complaints, isolate complainants, and protect pilots with seniority regardless of behavior patterns. Most damning was a message from Reynolds to Kingston dated 14 months earlier. Another complaint against Whitman, same as usual, reclassifying as communication style issue. Recommend your member lay low on long hauls for a few weeks until this blows over. New diversity hire CEO still believes we're implementing his precious, inclusive culture. Better he stays focused on acquisition targets. The room fell silent as Gabriel finished reading. The betrayal was breathtaking in its calculation and contempt. They knew exactly what they were doing, Gabriel said finally, his voice controlled despite his anger. This wasn't negligence or misunderstanding. This was deliberate obstruction of company policy. Reynolds has been with Skyline since before your acquisition, Madison noted. He's maintained significant influence over operations and culture. Where is he now? Already at the airport preparing for the press conference, Madison replied. He's expecting to stand beside you as you address the media. Gabriel sat back, processing the revelations and their implications. Who else was involved in this systematic burial of complaints? Based on the email evidence, at least 4 department heads, including Patricia Winters in HR, Janelle reported. The system was designed to identify and neutralize complaints before they reached executive-level review. Gabriel turned to Amara. Did you know the extent of this? I suspected, but couldn't prove it, she replied. Many of us did. We called it the black hole. Complaints went in, but nothing ever came out. The injustice of it struck Gabriel anew. Employees like Amara had continued serving passengers with professionalism and dignity while navigating a system designed to silence their legitimate grievances. The press conference is in 90 minutes, Madison reminded him. We need to decide how to address this. The original plan was to announce Whitman's termination and a review of procedures. That's no longer sufficient, Gabriel stated firmly. This isn't about one pilot or one incident. It's about a deliberate conspiracy to undermine Skyline's values and my leadership. He stood and paced the room, thinking through the implications. The North Star merger, worth $3 billion and years of work, would almost certainly collapse if he publicly exposed the full extent of the problem. Shareholders would panic. The pilots' union would likely initiate work actions in response to any mass disciplinary proceedings. Yet covering up the truth would betray everything he had built Skyline to represent. Madison, Gabriel said finally, revise the press statement. We'll be announcing the immediate suspension of all executives implicated in these emails pending termination proceedings, beginning with Thomas Reynolds. Madison's eyes widened. Gabriel, the market reaction will be significant, he acknowledged, but continuing this cover-up would be worse both morally and eventually financially. His phone rang, the North Star board chair calling for their scheduled discussion. Gabriel excused himself to take the call in a private office. Mitchell, he answered. Gabriel, replied Eleanor Winters, North Star's formidable board chair. Our board has been monitoring developments closely. Before you make any public statements, we need to discuss implications for the merger. I understand your concerns, Eleanor, Gabriel said, but I've just discovered that the issues at Skyline go far beyond one incident or one pilot. There has been a coordinated effort by certain executives to undermine our anti-discrimination policies. All the more reason to handle this discreetly, Eleanor suggested. Address the immediate incident, make appropriate personnel changes quietly over time, and proceed with the merger as planned. Gabriel pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the weight of $3 billion and thousands of jobs in the balance. I can't do that, Eleanor, not in good conscience. Gabriel, Eleanor's tone turned sharp. You have responsibilities too. Shareholders, employees, and now potentially to North Star. This idealistic approach could destroy value for everyone involved. What value are we preserving if it's built on accepting discrimination? Gabriel countered. North Star approached Skyline specifically because of our reputation for integrity and innovation. That reputation means nothing if it's just marketing language. A long pause followed. You understand this likely means the end of our agreement. I do, Gabriel acknowledged, the words painful but necessary. And I regret that, deeply, but I can't build Skyline's future on a foundation of hypocrisy. The call ended with cool professional courtesy. the merger effectively terminated. Gabriel took a moment to absorb the magnitude of the financial sacrifice before returning to the conference room. North Star is withdrawing from the merger, he announced to his team. As expected. Madison looked stricken. Gabriel, the shareholders, will have to understand that some principles aren't negotiable, Gabriel finished. Now let's prepare for the press conference. As they worked through the revised statement, Gabriel's phone buzzed with another call. James Carter, North Star's CEO, calling separately from his board chair. James, Gabriel answered, stepping away again. I just heard from Eleanor, Carter said without preamble. The board voted to withdraw from the merger. I understand completely, Gabriel replied. It's a significant risk given the current situation. That's why I'm calling, Carter continued unexpectedly. I disagree with their decision. Gabriel paused. I'm not sure I understand. I've spent 18 months getting to know you and Skyline, Carter explained. What I've seen in the past 24 hours, your willingness to confront racism directly even at great cost, only confirms what I already believed about your leadership. I appreciate that, James, but let me finish, Carter insisted. I'm resigning from North Star effective immediately. Gabriel was stunned. James, that's not necessary. It is to me, Carter replied firmly. I can't represent a company that walks away from a partner demonstrating genuine integrity. Moreover, I'm bringing my leadership team and investment group with me. We want to support Skyline through this transition and beyond. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Carter outlining an alternative investment structure that would provide much of the capital the merger had promised, though with different terms and timeline. By the time they hung up, what had seemed like a financial disaster had transformed into a different, but potentially stronger partnership. Back in the conference room, Gabriel shared the unexpected development with his team. This doesn't replace the merger, he cautioned, but it provides stability through what's coming next. Which is? Janelle asked. Complete transparency and accountability, Gabriel replied, starting in 45 minutes at the press conference. They arrived at the airport media center to find it packed with journalists. Thomas Reynolds was already there, looking confident as he reviewed notes with the PR team. His expression changed to confusion when he saw Gabriel arrive with Amara Johnson. Gabriel, Reynolds greeted him with forced casualness. I've prepared some talking points emphasizing our swift response to the incident and Whitman's suspension. I suggest we focus on Skyline's ongoing commitment to diversity rather than dwelling on one unfortunate episode. Gabriel studied the man who had systematically undermined his vision for Skyline while pretending to support it. That won't be necessary, Thomas. I'll handle the statement. Reynolds frowned slightly. As VP of Operations, I should have a voice in addressing operational matters. Your voice has been quite clear in your emails with Wallace Kingston, Gabriel replied quietly. Those emails are now part of our official investigation. The blood drained from Reynolds' face as understanding dawned. Whatever you think you found has been taken out of context. New diversity hire CEO still believes we're implementing his precious inclusive culture, Gabriel quoted from memory. Is there a context where that means something other than deliberate deception and racism, Thomas? Before Reynolds could respond, Gabriel gestured to security personnel waiting nearby. Please escort Mr. Reynolds from the premises. His employment with Skyline is suspended pending termination proceedings. As a stunned Reynolds was led away, Wallace Kingston approached, having witnessed the confrontation. Mitchell, you're making a grave mistake. The union will not stand for this kind of purge. Mr. Kingston, Gabriel replied calmly, I have emails showing your direct collaboration in suppressing discrimination complaints. Would you prefer I share those publicly or privately? Kingston's confident demeanor faltered. You're threatening the stability of this entire airline. Without experienced leadership and pilots, we'll manage, Gabriel cut him off. There are plenty of excellent pilots who don't require special protection for racist behavior. The press conference began moments later, with Gabriel stepping to the podium alone, except for Amara standing nearby, a deliberate visual statement about whose perspectives were now being centered at Skyline. Good morning, Gabriel began. Yesterday, on Skyline Airways Flight 447 from Chicago to Atlanta, Captain Richard Whitman made explicitly racist comments over the aircraft intercom. Those comments were not only morally reprehensible, but violated the core values of the company I built. Cameras flashed as Gabriel continued, his voice steady. Captain Whitman has been suspended pending termination. However, our internal investigation has revealed something far more troubling: a systematic effort by certain executives to hide discrimination complaints and protect those engaging in biased behavior. A murmur ran through the assembled journalists as Gabriel outlined the email, evidence, the pattern of reclassified complaints, and the retribution against those who spoke up. Effective immediately, Thomas Reynolds, VP of Operations, has been suspended pending termination, along with 3 other executives implicated in this cover-up. Additional administrative actions will follow as our investigation continues. A reporter called out, "What about the North Star merger? Sources say the deal is off." "The merger as originally structured will not proceed," Gabriel confirmed. "However, I'm pleased to announce that James Carter, formerly CEO of North Star, will be joining Skyline as a strategic advisor, bringing significant investment capital to support our transformation." The revelation sent reporters scrambling to update their stories. What had seemed like a corporate implosion was reshaping into something unexpected. "Mr. Mitchell," another journalist asked, "how will Skyline operate with so many senior personnel removed simultaneously?" "With greater integrity," Gabriel replied simply. "I'm announcing the formation of an employee advocacy department led by Amara Johnson, who has 11 years of experience with Skyline. This department will ensure all complaints are properly addressed and that our culture truly reflects our values." He continued, outlining additional structural changes: an independent oversight committee headed by Dr. Elijah Washington to review all past discrimination complaints, new protocols for pilot accountability, and mandatory leadership changes within the pilots' union regarding discrimination cases. As the press conference concluded, Gabriel felt a complex mixture of emotions: regret for not discovering these problems sooner, determination to create genuine change, and surprising optimism about Skyline's future. The $3 billion merger was gone, but something potentially more valuable was taking shape: a company truly aligned with its professed values. Back in the executive offices, Gabriel met with his remaining leadership team to implement the announced changes. Their work was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, James Carter, arriving directly from the airport after resigning from North Star. "The board is in complete disarray," Carter reported with barely suppressed satisfaction. "They didn't expect me to walk away, let alone bring my team and investors with me." "I still can't believe you did that," Gabriel admitted. Carter shrugged. "I've been in this industry 30 years. Companies that compromise their values to save deals ultimately lose anyway. What you're doing here, that's the future of business, whether the old guard recognizes it or not." As they discussed new partnership structures, Gabriel's assistant interrupted with an urgent message. Wallace Kingston was holding an emergency press conference at the pilots' union headquarters. They turned to the office television just in time to hear Kingston declare, "Skyline's leadership has initiated a politically motivated purge based on isolated incidents blown out of proportion. The pilots' union is calling for a vote of no confidence in CEO Gabriel Mitchell." Gabriel watched calmly as Kingston continued his defensive rhetoric. "Should we respond?" Madison asked anxiously. "No need," Gabriel replied. "Let's see how this plays out." They didn't have to wait long. As Kingston took questions, a reporter asked, "Mr. Kingston, we've obtained emails showing your direct involvement in suppressing discrimination complaints against pilots. Do you deny working with Thomas Reynolds to reclassify these complaints?" Kingston's momentary speechlessness was damning. When he finally responded with legalistic equivocation, the damage was done. Another reporter followed up. "Multiple pilots are now coming forward saying they were pressured to remain silent about witnessing discriminatory behavior. What is your response?" By the time Kingston abruptly ended the press conference, the narrative had shifted dramatically. Far from rallying support against Gabriel, Kingston had exposed the union leadership's complicity in the very system being dismantled. That went better than expected. James observed dryly. Gabriel's phone buzzed with a notification. Skyline stock had initially plummeted 16% after the press conference announcements, but was now recovering, down only 7% as investors processed the full story and the new partnership with Carter's investment group. More significantly, messages of support were flooding in from Skyline employees across the country, particularly from Black, Latino, and Asian staff who had experienced or witnessed the very behaviors Gabriel was addressing. For many, it was the first time they felt their experiences were truly being validated by corporate leadership. Amara knocked and entered with a tablet. "You should see this," she said, handing it to Gabriel. On the screen was a joint statement from 17 Skyline pilots, all respected veterans with impeccable safety records, distancing themselves from Kingston and expressing support for Gabriel's actions. "We fly planes with excellence and professionalism," the statement concluded. "We neither need nor want special protection for bigotry." The revelation was powerful. The assumption that all pilots would stand with Kingston had been wrong. Like any group, they were individuals with diverse perspectives, and many had simply been silenced by the same system that protected problematic colleagues. "This is just the beginning," Gabriel told his team as they continued planning the company's transformation. "Real change takes time and persistence. We'll face resistance, setbacks, and criticism. But for perhaps the first time, Skyline Airways will truly embody the values written in our mission statement." As evening approached, Gabriel took a moment alone in his office, reflecting on the extraordinary events of the past 36 hours. What had begun with a racist announcement on Flight 447 had exposed deep systemic problems, but also created unprecedented opportunity for meaningful change. His phone rang one last time that day, Dr. Elijah Washington calling to accept the role, heading the Oversight Committee. "I've reviewed the initial documentation," Dr. Washington said. "The problem is even more pervasive than we discussed, but so is the potential for transformation. You've opened a door that most corporate leaders keep firmly shut. Now we need to ensure it never closes again," Gabriel replied, his resolve strengthened by the day's revelations. The path forward would not be easy, but it would be authentic. And in that authenticity lay the true value of Skyline Airways, far beyond any $3 billion merger or quarterly profit report. It was the revelation that principles consistently applied created not just moral satisfaction, but sustainable business success. The morning sun cast long shadows across Gabriel Mitchell's desk as he reviewed the latest reports on Skyline Airways' tumultuous transformation. 7 days had passed since Captain Whitman's racist announcement on Flight 447, and the company was experiencing what Gabriel's grandfather would have called growing pains, the necessary discomfort that precedes meaningful change. The financial impact had been severe, but not catastrophic. Skyline stock had stabilized at 12% below its pre-incident value, with analysts divided on the company's future. James Carter's investment group had provided crucial capital, stability, but the larger financial institutions were taking a wait-and-see approach. More concerning was the operational disruption. 32 pilots had called in sick simultaneously, an obvious coordinated action organized by Wallace Kingston and the union leadership. Though this represented only 7% of Skyline's pilot workforce, it had forced the cancellation of 64 flights over 3 days, stranding thousands of passengers and costing millions in compensation. Gabriel sipped his coffee as Amara Johnson entered his office with the morning's personnel update. "The good news is that sickout seems to be ending," she reported. 27 pilots have returned to the schedule today. "The bad news is that Thomas Reynolds is filing a wrongful termination lawsuit, claiming he was fulfilling his operational duties according to established protocols." Gabriel nodded, unsurprised. "And the Employee Advocacy Department?" "We've received 312 new reports in the first week," Amara said, her expression mixed between concern at the number and satisfaction that people were finally speaking up. "Many date back years but weren't formally reported because employees didn't trust the system. Categorization? 68% relate to racial discrimination, 23% to gender-based harassment or bias, and the remainder to other protected categories, Amara detailed. We're organizing them by severity and pattern to address the most critical situations first. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, processing the information. The volume was disturbing, but validated his decision to confront these issues directly, rather than managing them away. "How are you holding up?" he asked Amara, recognizing the enormous responsibility he'd placed on her shoulders. "Overwhelmed but motivated," she admitted. "For the first time in my career, I feel like my work actually matches the company values written on the wall." Their conversation was interrupted by Gabriel's assistant announcing an urgent call from Madison Taylor, PR director, who was dealing with media at Skyline's Chicago hub. "Gabriel," Madison began breathlessly when he put her on speaker. "Kingston just held another press conference. He's claiming the operational disruptions prove that Skyline can't function without the pilots he represents. But that's not the worst part." "Go on," Gabriel prompted. He brought 5 passengers from various Skyline flights who claim they've experienced delays and canceled flights due to reckless social engineering by leadership. "They're calling for your resignation and a return to operational focus over political correctness." Gabriel exchanged glances with Amara. They had anticipated resistance, but the coordinated nature of the opposition was becoming clearer. "There's more," Madison continued. "Wallace announced that a group of minority-owned businesses are concerned about the stability of Skyline and questioning whether the current disruption undermines your goal of creating the largest Black-owned business in America." That was a calculated blow, attempting to position Gabriel's commitment to addressing racism as somehow contrary to Black business success. The strategy was as transparent as it was cynical. "Who are these minority-owned businesses?" Gabriel asked. "3 companies, all with ties to North Star board members," Madison replied. "We've confirmed they received significant contracts from North Star last year." The full picture was emerging, a coordinated effort by displaced executives, union leadership, and the jilted North Star board to undermine Skyline's transformation and force a return to the status quo. The strategy was to make the cost of change appear greater than the cost of continuing the old systems. "Madison, prepare a statement acknowledging the operational challenges, but reaffirming our commitment to addressing the root causes of discrimination at Skyline. No personal attacks on Kingston or others, just clear, principled messaging." After ending the call, Gabriel turned to Amara. "They're trying to force us to choose between operational stability and cultural change. As if those are mutually exclusive," Amara noted with frustration. "Some of our best pilots are the ones who supported your actions from the beginning." Gabriel's phone buzzed with a text from Janelle Cooper. "Pilots union filing formal grievance against termination proceedings for Whitman and 6 others, claiming contractual violations, need to discuss strategy." The pressure was mounting from all sides. Gabriel had anticipated resistance, but perhaps underestimated how entrenched the opposition to change would be, and how many resources they would deploy to maintain the status quo. "Mr. Mitchell," his assistant called over the intercom. "Dr. Washington and James Carter are here for your 9 o'clock. The arrival of his 2 strongest allies was timely. Dr. Washington had been working tirelessly to establish the Independent Oversight Committee, while Carter had been stabilizing the financial foundation during the transition. Quite the coordinated offensive they're mounting," Dr. Washington observed after hearing the latest developments. At 65, the civil rights attorney had seen decades of institutional resistance to equality and recognized the patterns immediately. "Kingston is more strategic than I gave him credit for," Gabriel acknowledged. "He's positioned this as being about operational excellence versus social justice, when it's actually about accountability versus impunity." James Carter nodded thoughtfully. "They're trying to increase the pain point until you back down or shareholders force a change. Classic pressure campaign, made more effective by the genuine operational challenges," Gabriel added. "We can't ignore that passengers are being affected by the sick-out." The discussion was interrupted by a call Gabriel couldn't ignore. Eleanor Winters, North Star's board chair, whose company had withdrawn from the merger the previous week. "Gabriel," Eleanor began, her tone professionally pleasant, "our board has been monitoring Skyline's situation with concern." "I'm sure you have," Gabriel replied neutrally. The disruption appears more significant than anticipated, she continued. We're hearing from mutual business partners that confidence in Skyline's stability is wavering. Gabriel said nothing, waiting for her to reach her point. In light of these developments, our board is prepared to reconsider the merger under modified terms, Eleanor finally offered. We believe combining our companies would provide the stability Skyline needs while allowing the gradual implementation of your cultural initiatives on a more sustainable timeline. There it was, the carrot after Kingston's stick. The $3 billion deal was back on the table, with the unspoken condition that Gabriel moderate his approach to addressing discrimination. That's a generous offer, Eleanor, Gabriel replied, carefully. May I ask what prompted this reconsideration? Business is business, Gabriel, she said smoothly. The initial reaction to your announcements was perhaps overly cautious. We see value in Skyline's routes and operational capabilities, despite the current challenges. And my leadership? Gabriel pressed. Last week that seemed to be a sticking point. A slight pause. We believe with proper board oversight and agreed upon protocols for handling internal matters, your vision for the company could still align with North Star's objectives. The subtext was clear. They would proceed with the merger if Gabriel accepted constraints on his authority to address discrimination, allowing the board to protect executives like Reynolds and pilots like Whitman under the guise of proper protocols. I appreciate the offer, Eleanor, Gabriel said. I'll discuss it with my team and respond by end of day. After ending the call, Gabriel shared the conversation with his advisors. They're offering a return to the full merger if I essentially abandon the transformation we've begun. $3 billion is a powerful incentive, Carter observed, though his tone suggested he wasn't advocating acceptance. It's not just about the money, Gabriel replied. The merger would solve our immediate operational challenges. With North Star's pilots, the sick-out would become irrelevant. The stock would recover, likely exceeding pre-incident levels. By conventional, business metrics accepting would be the obvious choice. Dr. Washington studied Gabriel thoughtfully. But you're considering more than conventional metrics. I'm considering the message it sends, Gabriel confirmed. If we accept constraints on addressing discrimination to secure financial advantages, we're reinforcing the very system we're trying to change, one that prioritizes profits over people's dignity. The three men fell silent, each contemplating the weight of the decision facing Skyline Airways. The crisis point had arrived sooner than expected, forced by the coordinated pressure campaign from multiple directions. Their deliberation was interrupted by Gabriel's assistant announcing another visitor, Michael Townsend, the passenger from seat 15C who had been the target of Captain Whitman's racist comments. Mr. Townsend, Gabriel greeted him, surprised by the unexpected visit. What brings you back to Atlanta? I've been following the developments, Townsend explained. The sick-out, the media coverage, the lawsuits. I wanted to speak with you. Directly, Gabriel introduced him to Dr. Washington and James Carter before asking, "What's on your mind?" I'm concerned that I've inadvertently become the catalyst for potentially destroying Skyline Airways, Townsend said frankly. That was never my intention. You did nothing wrong, Gabriel assured him. You simply retrieved your phone during light turbulence. Captain Whitman's reaction and the system that protected such behavior are the issue, not your actions. Even so, Townsend continued, I'm seeing the financial impact, the operational disruptions, the pressure you're facing. I want you to know that if backing away from this confrontation is necessary to save the airline, I would understand. Gabriel was struck by the selflessness of the offer. Townsend, who had experienced direct discrimination, was willing to accept continued injustice if it meant preserving jobs and services. Thank you, Michael, Gabriel said sincerely. But accepting discrimination as the price of doing business is exactly the calculation that allowed these problems to develop in the first place. Someone always pays that price, usually those with the least power to refuse. Townsend nodded slowly. I suspected that would be your answer. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, regardless of how it turns out. After Townsend departed, the strategy session continued with increased urgency. The North Star offer had added new complexity to an already challenging situation. We need to address the operational issues directly, Gabriel decided. As long as passengers are being stranded, Kingston's narrative gains credibility. I've been speaking with the pilots who support your changes, Carter offered. Many are willing to take on additional flights to cover the sick out, but they're concerned about retaliation from Kingston and the union leadership. We can provide protection against retaliation, Amara suggested. But we need to make that commitment explicit and credible. Dr. Washington added another perspective. The independent committee has reviewed 47 cases so far. The patterns are consistent and disturbing. Backing down now would betray not just current employees, but all those who were pushed out or silenced over the years. As they strategized, Gabriel received an urgent message. Thomas Reynolds had scheduled a press conference for noon, where he would reveal the true motivation behind Skyline's recent actions. Given Reynolds' intimate knowledge of company operations and Gabriel's leadership, his public opposition could be damaging. The crisis was escalating by the hour. Kingston attacking from one direction, Reynolds from another, North Star offering a tempting but compromised lifeline, and passengers caught in the middle as operational disruptions continued. We need to make a definitive decision, Gabriel said finally. Continue the transformation despite the costs, or accept the North Star offer and the constraints that come with it. The room fell silent as each person contemplated the implications. The $3 billion merger would certainly solve the immediate financial and operational challenges, but at what cost to Skyline's integrity and the long-term well-being of its employees? Before we decide, Gabriel said, I want to hear from more of the people most affected. He asked Amara to arrange an immediate virtual meeting with representatives from employee resource groups across Skyline's network. Within 30 minutes, Gabriel was addressing 18 employees from various backgrounds, positions, and locations within the company. He explained the situation candidly, including the North Star offer and its likely implications for addressing discrimination. I want to hear your perspectives, Gabriel told them. You're the ones who have experienced these issues firsthand. What would accepting the North Star offer mean to you? For the next hour, Gabriel listened as employees shared their experiences, hopes, and concerns. Some expressed fear about job security if the financial situation deteriorated further. Others voiced profound appreciation for finally having leadership that took discrimination seriously. A black ground operations supervisor in Detroit spoke particularly powerfully. For 20 years, I've watched colleagues get passed over, disrespected, and pushed out while we were told nothing could be done because of the system. If you compromise, now because it's financially convenient, you'll confirm what many of us have always suspected, that equality is a luxury only afforded when it's cheap and easy. By the time the virtual meeting ended, Gabriel's path was clear. He returned to the strategy session with renewed determination. We're declining North Star's offer, he announced, and we're accelerating our transformation, not retreating from it. The financial implications, Carter began, will be significant, Gabriel acknowledged. But we'll find another way to stabilize operations without compromising our commitment to addressing discrimination. The team spent the next hour developing a comprehensive response to the mounting crisis, financial measures to weather the storm, operational adjustments to minimize passenger disruptions, legal strategies to counter Kingston and Reynolds, and communication plans to clarify what was really at stake. As noon approached, they gathered around a television to watch Thomas Reynolds' press conference. The former VP of Operations appeared confident as he approached the podium, surrounded by supporters including Wallace Kingston and several North Star board members, a visual confirmation of the coordinated opposition. For 7 years, I helped build Skyline Airways into a successful national carrier, Reynolds began. Today, that success is being dismantled by leadership that has lost sight of operational excellence in favor of political agendas. Gabriel watched calmly as Reynolds continued his attack, making dire predictions about Skyline's future and questioning Gabriel's judgment and experience. The accusations were predictable until Reynolds took an unexpected turn. What few people understand is that Gabriel Mitchell's so-called transformation was never about improving Skyline, Reynolds claimed. It was about maximizing the company's value for the North Star merger, a merger Mitchell himself jeopardized with his impulsive overreaction to a minor incident. The accusation was both false and strategically clever, attempting to position Gabriel's principled stand as actually being financially motivated, thus undermining his moral authority while simultaneously blaming him for the merger's collapse. As Reynolds continued, Gabriel's phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Winters. "Our offer expires at 5 p.m. today. After Reynolds's revelations, we'll need to reassess terms if you delay." The coordinated pressure campaign was reaching its climax. In the next few hours, Gabriel would need to make decisions that would determine not just his own future, but that of Skyline Airways and all who depended on it. The crisis point had arrived, testing not just Gabriel's leadership but his fundamental belief that doing the right thing was ultimately also good business, even when the immediate cost seemed overwhelming. The packed auditorium at Skyline Airways Atlanta headquarters buzzed with anticipation. Employees, media representatives, industry analysts, and community leaders filled every seat, with hundreds more watching via livestream across the country. 6 weeks had passed since Captain Whitman's racist announcement on Flight 447, and Gabriel Mitchell had called this company-wide meeting to announce the culmination of the most tumultuous period in Skyline's history. Gabriel stood backstage, reviewing his notes one final time. The past month and a half had tested him in ways he never imagined when building Skyline Airways, forcing decisions that balanced principle against pragmatism, immediate costs against long-term values. 5 minutes, Mr. Mitchell, his assistant reminded him. Gabriel nodded, glancing at the group that would join him on stage. Amara Johnson, now Executive Vice President of Employee Advocacy. Dr. Elijah Washington, heading the Independent Oversight Committee. James Carter, who had become Skyline's Chief Strategy Officer after his departure from North Star. And Michael Townsend, the passenger whose simple act of retrieving his phone had inadvertently triggered Skyline's transformation. "Ready?" Gabriel asked them. "As ready as one can be for making history," Dr. Washington replied with a small smile. They took their places on stage as Madison Taylor introduced Gabriel to enthusiastic applause from many attendees, though noticeably restrained response from others, a visible representation of the company's ongoing divisions. "Thank you all for being here today," Gabriel began, surveying the diverse audience. 6 weeks ago, a Skyline Airways pilot made explicitly racist comments over the aircraft intercom, unaware that I was sitting in first class, hearing every word. What followed has been described as everything from a necessary reckoning to a corporate implosion. He paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle. Today I want to share the results of our comprehensive review and the changes we're implementing at Skyline Airways. But first, I believe context is important. Gabriel described the systematic suppression of discrimination complaints discovered in the aftermath of Flight 447, the deliberate misclassification of reports, the retaliation against those who spoke up, and the protection of those with power regardless of their behavior. This wasn't about one pilot or one incident, Gabriel emphasized. It was about a system designed to maintain certain power structures while presenting a public image of inclusion and equality. He outlined the immediate actions taken, the termination of Richard Whitman and 6 other pilots with documented patterns of discriminatory behavior, the removal of Thomas Reynolds and 3 other executives who had orchestrated the cover-up, and the creation of new accountability structures. These decisions came at significant cost, Gabriel acknowledged. Our stock dropped 22% at its lowest point. We lost the $3 billion merger with North Star. We weathered a 10-day pilot sick-out that disrupted thousands of flights. Murmurs rippled through the audience as Gabriel continued. Many questioned whether addressing discrimination was worth such a high price. Today, I want to answer that question definitively. Gabriel gestured to a large screen behind him, which displayed Skyline's latest financial results. The numbers told a remarkable story of recovery. Operational metrics returning to pre-crisis levels, passenger bookings trending upward, and the stock price rebounding to just 8% below its previous position. 6 weeks ago, we were offered a choice between financial stability and moral integrity, Gabriel explained. We chose integrity, believing that true stability could only come from alignment between our stated values and our actual practices. Today's results suggest that Choice was not only right, but also financially sound. He introduced James Carter, who detailed the new investment structure that had replaced the North Star merger, a diverse coalition of partners committed to both business excellence and genuine inclusion. Instead of one $3 billion merger, we've secured $2.7 billion in strategic investments from partners who share our vision, Carter explained. These partners see Skyline's commitment to accountability as a strength, not a liability. Next, Amara Johnson shared outcomes from the Employee Advocacy Department's first 6 weeks. 487 historical complaints reviewed, appropriate remedial, actions taken in 341 cases, and a 78% reduction in new incidents since implementing transparent accountability systems. Most importantly, Amara emphasized, employee satisfaction scores have increased across all demographics, with the largest gains among previously marginalized groups. When people know they'll be treated with dignity, they bring their best selves to work. Dr. Washington followed with findings from the Independent Oversight Committee, documenting both the extent of previous problems and the effectiveness of new safeguards. We found evidence of systematic discrimination dating back 15 years, he reported. But we've also seen remarkable commitment to change at all levels of the organization. The transformation is real and measurable. As each speaker finished, Gabriel returned to the podium for the most significant announcements. Today, I'm pleased to share 3 major developments, he began. First, Skyline Airways has reached a new agreement with the pilots' union, under new leadership after members voted overwhelmingly to remove Wallace Kingston following revelations about his role in suppressing discrimination complaints. The announcement drew strong applause, particularly from employees who had witnessed Kingston's pressure campaign firsthand. Second, we've created the Skyline Inclusion Initiative, committing $50 million over 5 years to develop talent pipelines from underrepresented communities into aviation careers. This initiative will help build the diverse, excellent workforce our industry needs. More applause followed, though some financial analysts in attendance appeared skeptical about the substantial investment. Finally, Gabriel continued, I'm proud to announce that despite the turbulence of recent weeks, Skyline Airways has completed the acquisition of Western Regional Airlines, making us officially the largest Black-owned business in America. The QS auditorium erupted in cheers and applause, many attendees rising to their feet. The acquisition, though smaller than the North Star merger would have been, represented the achievement of Gabriel's original vision, despite the crisis that had threatened to derail it entirely. As the applause subsided, Gabriel adopted a more reflective tone. 6 weeks ago, I heard words of bigotry broadcast throughout an aircraft I built. In that moment, I faced a question many of you have faced throughout your lives. Do I speak up at great risk or remain silent for temporary comfort? The audience grew quiet, many nodding in recognition of this universal dilemma. What we've learned through this journey is that accountability isn't the enemy of excellence, it's its foundation, Gabriel continued. A company cannot truly soar when some of its people are weighed down by discrimination, their talents constrained by bias, their contributions dismissed because of who they are rather than what they do. He invited Michael Townsend to join him. At the podium, the passenger whose dignity had been violated on Flight 447. Michael didn't ask to become part of Skyline's story, Gabriel explained. He simply retrieved his phone during light turbulence, but in how we responded to what happened next, we defined who we truly are as a company. Townsend spoke briefly but powerfully about his experience and the unexpected journey that followed. What happened to me happens to people of color every day, he noted. The difference here was that someone with power chose to stand with those who typically lack it. As the presentation concluded, Gabriel opened the floor for questions. They came rapidly from all quarters, employees seeking clarification on new policies, media probing for deeper details, analysts questioning the business implications. One question from a veteran pilot captured the lingering tension. These changes have been disruptive and costly. How do you respond to colleagues who feel this transformation prioritizes social issues over operational excellence? Gabriel considered his response carefully. I reject the premise that treating all employees with dignity somehow compromises operational excellence. The best pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and ground crew can be found among all demographics. When we eliminate barriers that have nothing to do with skill or dedication, we expand our access to talent, not restrict it. The Q&A continued for nearly an hour, with Gabriel and his team addressing concerns transparently while emphasizing the measurable improvements already visible throughout the company. As the event concluded, Gabriel offered closing thoughts that looked toward Skyline's future. Transformation isn't an event but a process, he acknowledged. We've made significant progress, but our journey continues. What I can promise is that Skyline Airways will never again value comfort over conscience or profit over people's dignity. The response was a standing ovation from most attendees, though notably not all, a reminder that cultural change remains challenging even amid successful results. Later that evening, Gabriel hosted a smaller gathering for the key individuals who had helped navigate the crisis. Amara Johnson, Dr. Washington, James Carter, Michael Townsend, and others who had shown particular courage during the difficult weeks following Flight 447. I want to thank each of you, Gabriel said as they celebrated their hard-won achievements. When it would have been easier to compromise, you insisted on genuine accountability. Skyline is forever changed because of your commitment. Amara raised her glass in toast to transformation and justice, proving they're not just moral imperatives but good business. As conversations flowed around him, Gabriel stepped onto the balcony of Skyline's executive lounge, watching aircraft taking off and landing in the distance, each representing hundreds of lives temporarily entrusted to his company. The responsibility remained enormous, but the alignment between Skyline's stated values and actual practices had never been stronger. His phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Winters, North Star's board chair. Impressive results, Gabriel. Perhaps we were hasty in our judgment. Would you consider renewed partnership discussions? Gabriel smiled slightly at the irony. The same board that had withdrawn from the merger, rather than support his stand against discrimination, now sought to associate with Skyline's success. His response was polite but clear. Thank you, Eleanor. But we found partners whose values aligned with ours even during challenging times. I wish North Star continued success under leadership that shares its priorities. Returning to the gathering, Gabriel found Dr. Washington in conversation with several younger employees eager to learn from his decades of civil rights experience. The most important lesson, Dr. Washington was telling them, is that systems don't change because of noble intentions alone. They change when people with power accept personal cost to create collective benefit. Gabriel nodded in agreement as he joined the circle. And when we demonstrate that doing the right thing is ultimately also the smart thing, even if the path there is difficult. As the evening wound down, Michael Townsend approached Gabriel one last time. I never expected retrieving my phone would lead to all this, he said, gesturing to the celebration around them. It didn't, Gabriel replied thoughtfully. What led to this was decades of people being marginalized, their complaints ignored, their talents undervalued, until finally, enough was enough. You were simply the catalyst for a reckoning that was long overdue. 3 months later, Gabriel Mitchell stood at a podium in New York, accepting the Corporate Leadership Award from the National Association for Business Ethics. Skyline Airways had not only recovered from the crisis, but emerged stronger, financially, operationally, and culturally. The pilot sickout had ended after 10 days when rank-and-file members rejected Kingston's continued resistance. Thomas Reynolds's wrongful termination lawsuit had been dismissed after email evidence revealed the extent of his deception. Most importantly, Skyline's new accountability systems had transformed the employee experience, creating a culture where excellence and inclusion reinforced rather than competed with each other. What we learned at Skyline Airways is that accountability isn't the enemy of success. It's its prerequisite, Gabriel told the assembled business leaders. By ensuring that our practices matched our principles, we built a stronger company capable of weathering any turbulence the future might bring. As he accepted the award, Gabriel reflected on the journey from that moment in Seat 2A. when he heard Captain Whitman's racist announcement to today's recognition of Skyline's transformation. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but the destination proved worthy of the difficult journey. In aviation, we have a saying, Gabriel concluded. A successful flight isn't measured just by whether you reach your destination, but by how you handle the unexpected turbulence along the way. The same is true in business and in life. Our character isn't defined during easy times, but by the choices we make when principles and pragmatism seem to conflict. He left the stage to thunderous applause, the award a tangible symbol of what Skyline Airways had become, not just the largest Black-owned business in America, but a model for how corporate accountability could create both moral and material value in the modern economy. The transformation that began with one pilot's racist announcement had created something new and enduring, a company where justice and success flew together, reaching heights neither could have achieved alone. What would you do if you were in Gabriel's position? Would you have risked a $3 billion merger to stand up against discrimination? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about accountability and justice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that doing the right thing matters. Thank you for watching, and remember, real change happens when people with power choose to use it responsibly. This powerful story reminds us that addressing racism requires more than surface-level solutions or corporate statements. True change demands courage to confront uncomfortable truths and willingness to accept short-term costs for long-term integrity. Gabriel Mitchell's journey demonstrates that leadership isn't about making convenient choices, but about aligning actions with values even when facing resistance. The systemic nature of discrimination thrives when those with power prioritize comfort over conscience and financial expediency over human dignity. The transformation at Skyline Airways teaches us that accountability isn't the enemy of excellence. It's its foundation. Organizations can't truly succeed when talent is constrained by bias and contributions are dismissed because of identity rather than merit. Most importantly, the story shows that doing the right thing, though initially costly, ultimately creates sustainable success by building cultures where everyone can contribute their best work in environments of dignity and respect. What would you do if faced with a choice between financial success and standing up against racism? Would you risk everything like Gabriel did, or take the easier path? Comment below with your thoughts on how you would handle this situation. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and had to decide whether to speak up? Share your experience and how it changed you. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about courage, accountability, and justice in modern America. By sharing this video, you help spread the message that standing against racism requires more than words. It demands action, even when it's difficult.